Army strives for academic excellence
and the highest standard of achievement as
expressed by the ideals of liberal arts tradition,
and education of the whole child.
We believe excellence
finds its best representation
within a school community where
education is enhanced by strong student-parent-teacher relationships,
service to share community values, and respect for the growth of self and others.
Another turning point, a fork stuck in the road.
We kicked off our 100-year celebration on Giant Relay Day. Our school community formed a human logo, which we feel represents the bonding of students, teachers, parents, alumni, and those who support our school. It's this bond that has lasted a century, making CA very special.
I hope you had the time of your life.
Today we have over 800 students. What a difference from our first CA home on Pearl Street, the Hill Street for Boys School in Denver. We opened in 1906 with a handful of students and teachers, yet the commitment was still the same: excellence in education. The school purchased the sublime 75-acre country estate of former business tycoon Jesse F. Wellborn. This gave us room to expand for the next 50 years. But what we have now is a far cry from what we had then.
I've been involved with the school for some 60 years. I came in 1946 as a student, and then after being graduation, went to Denver University and stayed on teaching and coaching. I taught ROTC, and then I taught science, I taught athletics, and became athletic director, raised our kids here all those years, and now we even have 2 of our grandchildren that go to the school. We started the summer day camp in 1953, and the main reason we started was because we had the boarding students, some of them over the summer and even over Christmas vacations. We started the camp, and in those days we had rope climbing, which you can't do now. We had horseback riding. We had horses on the campus. We had kayaking. We even kayaked down Bear Creek because in those days the water was good. But it was an ideal place to direct a summer camp. In a 6-year period, we had 5 headmasters and superintendents. So that were a lot of changes. And most of them were for the better of the school.
Over the years, CA's name and location changed several times. In 1924, it was known as Colorado Military School, only for boys, of course. After World War II broke out, the ROTC established a unit on campus.
Enrollment jumped to a record high of 160 students, grades 1 through 12. Because this was a military school, many of the school's officers and alums served in the war. The school soon began to distinguish itself when our horseback riders took home 48 ribbons at the 1945 stock show.
There were high hopes for the all-boys military school, but after the war, those hopes crumbled. People had had enough of the war, and there was little demand for a military education.
Struggling for students, the high school was closed, leaving only 1st through 9th graders attending. In the early 50s, school enrollment dropped to 74 students, and Colonel Hardy was forced to declare bankruptcy. Leadership changed hands twice before CA trustee Francis Newton turned to Chuck Frolicker to save CA.
Well, my first answer was no, thank you, because I think if you were old enough and experienced enough to seriously take on a school, you'd never come to Colorado Academy. It was a very humble place in every possible way. Physically, it was something between a wreck and a disaster. It had a couple of old broken down wooden cannons on the front lawn facing west in kind of an ominous fashion. And everything else was either the broken down gymnasium or the Army barracks, and tumbleweed and broken barbed wire fences and horses running around on barren fields, and really kind of an extraordinarily depressing place. Then there was this great house built by Mr. and Mrs. Jess Floyd Welborn was the one building on the property that held promise, and it was just a beautiful old home. First of all, as I've said over the phone, I would not take over a military school. And so they said, well, what would you want it to be? And I said, well, in the ideal world, it would be a coeducational country day school or a boarding school. When you sit around a table with those three people and they say, if you can get this school off in a different direction, we're going to stick with you no matter what. And I believe them.
In 1960, inspired by the school's proximity to the mountains, Chuck Frolicker co-founded Colorado Outward Bound. He hired Tap Tapley to run the organization dedicated to outdoor skill building and adventure. That same year produced the first 4 senior graduates in close to a decade.
In 1962, 70 students, faculty, and friends participated in a river trip down the Yampa and Green Rivers. The educational benefits of experiencing the outdoors continues to live on with the variety of exciting interims CA students participate in to this day.
I came to Colorado Academy in 1962 as a middle school history teacher. The enthusiasm and the patience and the energy faculty brought to this school was just extraordinary. And we did whatever we were asked to do. We taught a full class load. We coached sports 2 or 3 seasons a year. We covered evening study halls. We had dorm duty. And it took an extraordinary amount of energy for that to happen. But all of us had that energy and passion and commitment to education that so well served the school and the students at that point in time. When Frank Wallace came as headmaster in the late 70s, he had a dream that every child, when he graduated, would be able to play a musical instrument. And if you look at the school today, that image is in full force and in full bloom. It makes Colorado Academy one of the best schools, not only in the state of Colorado, but in the country as well.
In 1976, Frank Wallace took the helm as CA's new headmaster. During this period, the first Grandparents' Day was celebrated. The first parent-led auction raised $8,400, and the world-renowned Colorado Children's Chorale was based here on CA's campus. An exceptional day was when Frank Wallace paid off the $500,000 mortgage.
What am I most pleased about in my time there? I guess the fine arts program, which flourished, which grew under the creative influence of Dwayne Wolfe and then got picked up and expanded by Angel, and is something of which I hope the school is still proud. It's one of the few schools I know of that has a program all the way from kindergarten up through where children are performing all the time. I'm a member of the art exhibit each year in what is now a named dining room where all of the children, from the youngest to the oldest, would display their art, and their parents would come and see what they'd accomplished during the year. I was very fortunate to have Chris Babbs join me. Well, no, I joined Chris Babbs. He was there a year before I was, and then I appointed him Dean of the Faculty, recognizing the kind of virtuosity that he had and the kind of love of education and the scholarly approach he took. I went to a place that was already incredibly rich in its traditions. And I'd like to think that I added something to those traditions, the all-school assembly, starting off the school year with a story. I remember doing that in the sculpture garden originally before we had a theater. The seniors having brought the kindergartners on their backs, which was a tradition, and all gathered around and then tell them a story that I would try to unravel as the school year went on. I never did get to the end of the story, but that's just as well.
In 1973, it was a school on the outskirts of Denver. It still had its remnants or its signature of boarding school life. The school had just begun. Its present incarnation as a country day school had just recently gone co-ed, so it had begun its what might be called its modern evolution at that point.
Terry, she's one of our pioneer co-ed women
one of the first women students at CA.
Yeah, I was the first class of girls came in '71. It was pretty awesome.
And we were very glad that they did.
We have some of the military veterans that meet with our fifth graders each year on Veterans Day and talk about their experience with the school as well as their sacrifice and service to the country.
One of the greatest benefits of military school for me was when I came here, school-wise, I was a basket case. I owe everything in my life to the military school.
And I spent my first year as a West Point graduate commanding Company K of the 7th Cavalry against the North Koreans and the Chinese.
It's great to have all of those elements of the school that really go back to 1906 still have some kind of present representation in the school today.
There was much to celebrate at the beginning of the 80s. Yale University designated CA as a school of the 21st century.
The difference between a good school and a great school, and I do think that CA is a great school, is that a great school is never satisfied with that. Never, ever satisfied. They are always trying to do it better.
The campus renovation and beautification program began during the 90s and lasted a decade. From the Rather Library, Chowdhury Middle School, Shotter's Music Building, to the new dining hall and campus center, our school transformed what used to be barren and crude facilities into an exceptional environment for children to learn.
Our ability to have art and athletics and academics and have students involved in all three is really pretty exceptional. It is a college liberal arts education. So we are seeking to develop kids in terms of their intellect, in terms of their personal character, and in terms of their willingness to try various things and really fall in love with education.
The common thread throughout the decades of CA's history is a respect for children and a steadfast determination to provide an excellent opportunity for students to thrive.
One of the great strengths about our school, of course, is the relationships that get formed between teachers and students primarily. That's the key relationship. But it also exists beyond that. There's teachers and parents, there are interactions student to student that I think the bonds there are stronger than you see in normal situations. And anybody who comes onto our campus identifies that very quickly. Even though we're a community of 875 now, it feels like a very small family, and we're all connected in that way.
I think the field is an example of what parent enthusiasm and eagerness to make something happen have created. It's just astounding to me that this group of, I call them young because they are young parents, said we need another field and let's get the money together to do it, and by golly they did it, and there's the field and we're using it right now. It's wonderful.
None of us will be here for the next 100th, but the work we're doing now will provide for the next 100 years, and that's our legacy that we're handing forward.
Of my mind, misty watercolor memories of the way we were, scattered pictures of the smiles we left behind, smiles we gave to one another all the way we were. Can it be that it was all so simple then? Or has time rewritten every line? If we had the chance to do it all again, tell me, would we? Could we? Memories may be beautiful, and yet what's too painful to remember?